Episode 205 of the Downward Facing Spiritual Spiral podcast. Thrilled you're here today. My name is Eddie Cohn, host, producer, creator of the Spiritual Spiral. And thanks so much to my guest, Kurt Goebel, for joining me on the show. You're in store for a great conversation today. And it's interesting. Apologies for the delay in the next podcast. It's been almost like 10 days since I've released one, which I guess in this day and age is a long time. And something that Kurt and I talk about. Kurt's a composer, film composer. He's based out of Nashville. He also does music for advertisements, other artists. But something that we talk about, and something that I've been thinking about the last week, the rate at which content is produced. And that could be the media, that could be art, TV shows. What does that do to the creative process? What does that do to quality? If the world in which we live in is putting out so much content, a gargantuan amount of content every day, if record producers, record labels are expecting their artists to post content on TikTok, keep posting as much as they can. It's not about, full albums, but it's about singles every month or every 2 months. What does that do to quality? I'm not sure. I still wonder if music and art is as good as it used to be. Or does it even matter? Does quality even matter? And what's more important now is being in an audience's awareness. This show is sort of taken on many forms, but it's something that Kurt and I talk about is sort of this strange intersection of art and social media, the slow, intimate process of artistry, and how that sort of combats with the fast-paced world of tech. So as a side note, as I sort of lose hope sometimes with the world and the world of artistry, I just listened to this amazing podcast with Maya Hawke. She's Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke's daughter, and she's an artist, musician, and she was just on, actually, I don't know how long ago the podcast was, but she was on The Broken Record with Rick Rubin, and he's an amazing music producer. And gosh, just listening to her, I was sort of like, wow, she's just so smart and brilliant and aware and so creative. And it's sort of like, wow, maybe this world does produce still incredibly talented, prolific, interesting artists. Because when I was listening to her talk, I was pretty blown away. So I definitely suggest listening to that chat after you listen to the talk that I had with Kurt. Just a little backstory here. Kurt started studying piano at the age of 6. He started professionally gigging at the age of 14. He chose to major in piano at the University of Illinois. He went on to get his Master's of Music at the prestigious Media Writing and Production program at the University of Miami in Florida. And then he became a full-time composer for a gaming company, eventually relocating to Nashville, where he has established himself as a full-time composer and producer. Thanks so much, Kurt, for taking the time to speak to me. I thought it was a great talk. Any questions? Any concerns? You can find me on social media at Eddie Cohn or the Spiritual Spiral podcast. I have a bunch of new music that's come out over the last 4 months, which you can find on Bandcamp or Spotify. And I have a couple new remixes coming out in the next 6 weeks. And I also end this podcast by playing a song produced by Kurt. It's called Be All Right, from the artist Anna Graceman. And it's beautiful. It's an incredible song. So great work, Kurt. I end the show with that song or that single. I think it's being played in a lot of pretty big advertisement campaign right now, so you may recognize it. But thanks, Kurt, for letting me play this one. And information on my book. If you want an advance copy now, definitely send me a message on Instagram, and I'll let you know how you can get a copy. Definitely share the show with your friends. That would be amazing. a huge library of podcasts, so definitely check them out. Maybe subscribe on Spotify or iTunes. Please write a review. That would be a really big help. Thanks again, Kurt, for taking the time to speak to me. And as always, thanks to you for listening, supporting, and being a part of the Downward Facing Spiritual Spiral podcast.
I am close mic'd and compressed, ready to go. All right, man, you look good.
I'm good, likewise. Yeah, I appreciate you talking.
Yeah, for sure.
What are you working on today?
Well, I had a write yesterday.
Okay.
So I'm sort of, it went great, and I'm kind of already starting to mix.
Wow.
So, this one happened really, really quickly. I had, my workflow is kind of like, I don't like to leave things to chance. I always like prep, like the day before. Like if you and I were going to write tomorrow, I would spend a couple hours today just like roughing out an idea.
Okay.
Musically, because odds are I know that, I know what you're like as an artist, and I know what we're going to kind of go after. So I know what lane we're going to be in. So it's a good, like I'm working within set sort of parameters creatively, which is great. I prefer that.
Interesting. Well, it's. I think for me it would be really like, and maybe it's just my limitations and something that I need to get better at. But if I knew I was going to write with a country artist or a hip hop artist, I don't even know how I could do that, because I feel like I know what I do and I'm doing it pretty well. But I think that's the difference maybe between somebody like you and me, is that you are able to transform your creative aura into sort of different lanes. Is that appropriate to say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically a chef, right?
Right.
So chef, they know how to make a lot of dishes, and that's me.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of like, okay, well, what are the ingredients of this lane? I know what they are. I know what the drum sounds are like. I know what the grooves are like. The tones and the textures and the messaging. So it's sort of like I already start to build the foundation, and then I usually have, like a concept, maybe lyrically or just a broad theme. Like, hey, I'm hearing the word run, and then so when the artist comes in, have we started recording, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I didn't know. So yeah, when the artist comes in, there's already like this inspiring, hopefully. Sometimes it's pretty basic, but sometimes it's actually pretty fleshed out and it sounds good. Like I've got one guy I work with, like I already know the mic's set up, ready to go, and he's like basically just puts on the headphones and he hears the track. Like he hasn't heard it at all, and he's immediately spitting out melodies and nonsense syllables, which sometimes end up conveying like sort of where the lyric goes, because it's like a long A and it's a held out note. Okay, well that could be the word way, so
sure.
It's interesting how just that, usually our first impression is such a raw and usually like a good instinct, right? So anyway, that's just part of my process. But I had a write yesterday, and I had just like a couple hours the day before, and we hadn't even decided what we were going to do. And he's like, I'm open to anything. And I was like, oh man. So I listened to some of his other things, and I thought, I kind of took some inspiration from one of his other songs, sort of, stylistically.
Yeah.
And then, just started with a drum beat and machine, found a kit and started jamming and had a little pattern. And then I picked up the acoustic and, there was like in that drum kit and machine, there was like this sort of pad sound that I dug. So I sampled that, and then I kind of got it on the grid, and it became this sort of ambient thing. And then I picked up the acoustic, and then I had some riffs, and then I was off to the races.
Yeah.
And I mean, it came out great. I joked that it's like we made this song yesterday that I'm like, we should call this cinematic blues. Because it was like, you know, it ki- it wasn't like a legit like stomp clap song, but it was kind of like that, but with some other ambient textures, and the acoustic that I played kind of ended up sounding like it was a sample the way I chopped it up, and it was cool. Like,
Yeah.
so it was fun. So today I was actually like, dang, I think I'm like already mixing it. It's, it sounded great.
It feels like we'll backtrack eventually, but it feels like you're like what's the goal right now? Or it feels, because I know you definitely get music into film and television, but are other artists know do they know about you in Nashville and want to work with you as a producer? Because it feels like your weeks can differ depending on the projects or who's reaching out to you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, my world is mostly made up of probably probably 90% of the rights that I'm doing are for film and TV.
Okay.
On the sync side, I've kind of been a work for hire composer, writer, producer, so I've done a lot in the ad space for a very long time, and have been working in the sync side of things for film and TV for quite a few years now as well. So I do a lot of sync work, a lot of sync rights with artists, and then the other thing that I do is just straight up work for hire composition.
Great. It's you know what I was thinking as you're chatting. I was thinking about the word, the muse, and it's weird. Like I've been hired to write some songs for a television show, but it's been years. And then I also was working with a sync library company, which I ended up stop working with over the last year. But I primarily work in what I feel inspired when, and that could be an hour from now, or that could be 2 years from now. It's strange how the world of inspiration works. And when I'm more writing literature or prose, I do believe in the discipline of writing every couple days just to get that part of the brain going. But for me as a musician, that part of inspiration and creativity hasn't worked as well. So do you notice a change or a difference in creativity when you're working work for hire as opposed to sort of just at home feeling the vibes? Is there a difference, or do you feel pressure that you have to perform and get a product to somebody? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no. I feel like, well, there's always internal pressure to deliver and show up.
Yeah.
When the artist walks in the door and I've told them I've got a track started, I pray to God that they dig the track, and I mean, I always say, like, hey, if you're not feeling this, we can ditch this. I'm not. It's not that precious, but thankfully, I don't think that's ever happened. Either they haven't spoken up, or I've just done a decent job of preparing well. But I don't really have the luxury of waiting for the muse to show up. It definitely not with the work for hire, and especially when it was this massive project. In terms of just minutes of music, it's like I was writing. They were like 3 and 4 minute length pieces, instrumental things, and you do like 2 or 3, and you're like, yeah, okay, and then you're like, oh, track 4. Well, what am I going to do? Like, because they were a set, like they needed to function in a certain way for this client. So it was like, how am I going to do a dozen of these? In the sort of the same vibe. So yeah, I didn't really have the luxury of being like, oh well, I hope today I have a great idea. I it's doing your homework and listening to. It's just like anything. Like if somebody hired you and they said, well, we want you to paint some stuff and it needs to look like, Monet or whatever, you'd look at a lot of Monet and you'd kind of figure out his style. What are the palettes, and all of that. So for me, for this project, it was like, okay, I knew what my sound palette was. So a lot of times to hedge my bets, for a project like that where it's sort of, at least if I know I got to do 12 pieces in this vibe, I kind of make a new template with all kinds of sounds that are going to work. So at least everything's at my fingertips. So when I sit down and pull up this pluck patch, in Serum, I've been playing piano since I was 6, so I'm going to come up with something,
Right.
and that's going to take me down the road. So you just sort of, a lot of it's just showing up and hoping that, you do the best you can to prepare. And some days, some days are better than others. Some days I hit it out of the park and like, oh man, in 2 hours, like I've got the whole thing mapped out. It's not finished, but at least structurally, I've got my melody, I got my A section, I got my B section, I got my arrangement worked out, and then it's just, it's a matter of like, here's the thing. It's a great question, by the way. I think you only need a small seed of an idea to show up, and then your craft takes it the rest of the way.
Yeah.
So I remember my professor in grad school said, it's 10% or 15% inspiration, and the rest is craft. And at the time I was like, that's bull crap. Like, no way, it's got to be more inspiration. And he's totally right. I mean, if you just have, some little melodic idea, da 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 da, and some little answer, I mean, okay, well that's all you need. And then the years of doing it, you're knowing, okay, well I'm gonna harmonize that, and I'm gonna, this is how I'm gonna theme and variation, whatever. But
Yeah.
so the other thing is, there's preparation and there's experience. So there's the gem of the idea, but the other piece of it is just, we talked about this the other day, but just, living a balanced life and getting away from it and not burning the midnight oil on it. And so you're refreshed each day. And it's like, it's all the healthy living that, we all should be doing, drinking more water and getting enough sleep and, all that stuff. Because when I show up at, in the morning at the studio, whatever time that is, if it's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, I don't want to be dragging, so.
Yeah. There's sort of the paradox of technology, I believe, and the effect that it has on the purity of art and creation. And I just had this great guest on where, she's a singer-songwriter, but it does feel like the world we live in expects the creators to also do marketing and use the social medias, and where I think that's so dangerous is that I do think it sort of corrupts the purity of art. I think it does move the mind towards what people think as opposed to the mind moving towards just the creative process. With that said, though, and you could give us some examples, I think technology really in this space right now really does act as such a powerful vessel, I think, in this way where, if you hear something and you move, and it's weird, like ideas are so fleeting, and I often will hear something and by the time I get home it's gone. But it's sort of like, I do think there is a plus in the sense that if you are relatively a capable engineer with Logic, or I don't know what you use, if it's Ableton, but it's like it can help get those ideas out pretty quickly now. So on that hand, I think technology is pretty fucking powerful right now.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things that you're speaking about. One is, the technology. I mean, look, my son has an iPad, and the music he makes on the iPad is insane.
Yeah.
It's this little free app. It's called Medley. And I mean, I'm blown away with what he does on that and the volume of output that he, does. And he just sits on the couch, with his iPad. He doesn't have a studio. And, even to that point, the technology is moving more and more towards, AI mixing. Isotopes plugins are all very much leaning that way now. And, the program that he uses just does automatic mastering, and all the sounds are already compressed. And I mean, there is a little bit of EQ in that program. But anyway, so anybody with an iPad can be creative and make music. So I think, again, it, like we always say, eh, everybody with an iPhone is a photographer, but not everybody should be a photographer. So
Yeah, but it's weird. Like, do you think though that your son's work in medley, and I've read about bands that often like have had to hit records with some of the music that was actually made on GarageBand. It's like,
yeah.
does anybody even notice or care that or can people tell that, oh, this, because Spotify compresses everything so much? Can anybody even really tell? I don't know. It's
Yeah,
weird.
I don't think so. I mean, GarageBand, I mean, it has a limited, tool set and capability versus Logic. But if you have, if you have a great front end and you have a nice Apollo, interface or whatever going into GarageBand, well, the GarageBand is no worse off. It sounds the same as Logic. It's the same program. It's just, scaled back. So, no, I don't think anybody cares, and only people like us care. Like,
Right.
the people that don't know anything about this, they're listening to the song. They're not listening to, oh, is that snare drum crunchy or what's wrong? They don't care. They're listening to the emotion of it, and so to that end, the technology is amazing. And I mean, there's never been a better time in terms of the tool set for anybody to be making music. A nice mic, a nice preamp, and a computer is amazing. You know, the social media side of things, I think it's, when I was growing up and I was a teenager, I only knew a handful of musicians in my town, and like that was it. That was my network. But so obviously the world is at our fingertips in terms of like being exposed to different people's music and talent and reaching out to other people. I love that. I don't like I don't like how it ends up owning people and feeling like I mean, I was just today at lunch, I overheard, the guys next to the table over saying that, they knew a teenager that just felt bad if he didn't post something every day. And he was like apologizing online. I'm sorry I didn't make a post yesterday. Like that's a terrible headspace to live in. And also to live in the headspace of, well, I'm getting all my approval from social media. And if I don't get it, then,
Do you
internally I'm collapsing.
do you feel like music is more homogenized, emotionless now? I don't know if I'm generalizing, but I do wonder if the onslaught of tech, people spending so much time staring at screens, does music sound and feel different to you than it used to?
I think there's just, I mean, kind of, yeah. And there's so much of it. I think that's part of it too. Like, I mean, I have certain artists that I like, and then, so Spotify just suggests more like it. So it's like it just ends up sounding like a sea of the sameness, because the algorithm is like, yeah, well, you like, like there's this electronica artist that Lane 8,
Sure, yeah.
I dig it. It's
Me
like
too.
it's not overbearing. It's pleasant. It's well done. It sounds great. Like I love that. So I end up listening to a lot of his stuff, and then other things too. And so my family's like, yeah, you listen. All your stuff sounds the same. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I like Tycho. I like So, but yeah, there is. It's funny because. My son sometimes he's like, dude, can you turn off the music? I don't want to hear any music right now. And my wife's like, yeah, because it's all like 4 on the floor beats with like really light, airy female vocals. And I'm like, well, they're not wrong, right? So there does get a point where it's like, yeah, it does kind of all sound the same. Like if I'm not paying attention, is this Lane 8 or is this like 1,000 other artists that sound like him? So I don't know if that's because there's a dumbing down of music or if there's just so many more people doing it and we're all influenced by what's getting curated to us, so it sort of spawns more of that are people wanting to get into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because most people are like, oh, well, I want to make music like Tycho, so I'm gonna use his ingredients to bring it back the chef analogy, and now there's a lot of Tycho knockoffs, so yeah, I think there's probably sort of this homogenous thing, and especially kind of like pop music for sure, because the labels are looking to continue success. So to some degree, they're not looking for something that's truly unique because they know they can't sell it. So they're like, well, we need it to sound like, mostly like whatever artist, Billie Eilish. We need it to sound like Billie Eilish, but not like her, but like enough like her that it sounds familiar. Because that's the key. For them, it has to sound familiar on the first listen.
Something I remember, like, Avril Lavigne just put out a record. And I remember, I'm not much of a pop music guy, but I certainly like Pink, and I think Kelly Clarkson is great. And I remember Avril Lavigne's first record, and I thought there was some pretty cool stuff on that. And this one just sounds like so loud, and it's really compressed, and it just feels like she's screaming. And there's just, I can't say it other than this is the only way I can think about it. Just it feels like there's a lack of nuance and sensitivity and emotionality and heart, quote unquote heart, in a lot of the music that I hear now, and even some of my favorite bands like Tame Impala and Radiohead. I even sense a shift in the music that I hear from them. It feels like there's a specific formula. And it's interesting, and I'm not. It just I notice that's what I hear going on.
I hear it too. I mean, there are, like, I guess you'd consider him a legacy artist, but a guy like Bryan Adams from the '80s, he's still working and putting out new stuff occasionally. And I listened to one of his newer things not too long ago, and I was like, the same thing. I felt the same thing, like, doesn't sound as good. It sounds like he's on a cheap mic and he's really close to it, and like the fidelity, and just it didn't feel like what I thought it should feel like, coming from an artist of that level. And I think they just you read about it, they took so much more time back then. They'd spend a year in the studio making their records, and now the process just happens so much more quickly now, I think. But I don't know. I mean, even like some of the recent, Shania Twain put out a record, I don't know, a few years ago or whatever, and it had been a really long time since she had released anything. And it was the same thing. I was like, wow, she's Shania Twain. Like, she could work with anybody, any engineer, any producer, and it sounded like you said, too loud, overcompressed, just kind of like, not it. I mean, it was pro, but not like what you would, not like her other stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, it's not like there aren't good tools out there still. So I'm not sure, but I hear it.
Yeah. I was just like James Blake to me and Anderson .Paak. I think those records, and to my ears, sound like they weren't recorded in a home studio. There's a lot of depth to the drums, and So but I think the last point here before we backtrack, I think I wonder. It's weird. I felt like artists sort of controlled society in this weird, like they had a certain power. Like Led Zeppelin or U2, they were going to put out a fucking record when like they were ready, and we eagerly waited. And it feels like either their manager or they're thinking, we can't do that anymore because of society and because of tech and because of attention spans. So if people are making art not because of inspiration or because of internal desire, or because of just it's this innate thing that they have to do. If they are creating because the voices are saying, no, you have to do it this way, I think that might sort of be a reason why there's a shift that's going on in quality.
I agree 100%. I mean, it doesn't make any sense from a marketing standpoint and a numbers standpoint to be putting out an album every year or every 2 years, especially for new artists that are trying to increase their listeners on Spotify. I mean, any manager will tell you you should be putting out a song every month because the more often that you put something out, the more your numbers will increase versus people waiting 12 months and getting something. Because if they're not already a fan, then you're only getting one exposure. That's the thing. It's like you get one little blip, you drop all 10 songs on your record, right? Versus drip this month, drip next month. So they're getting 12 looks from you versus one look with all the music. So, you can say it's better or worse, but that's just, at my last job, and we were working with artists, and everyone was, that is the mindset. I mean, even One Republic was like, Ryan Tedder was like, I'm done doing records. He's like, I'm just going to do singles from here on out, like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And, just from he doesn't, he's got great numbers. He's not like trying to build numbers, but even for a band like that, it makes sense for them to be on my radar because I'm a big fan of theirs. So I get all the notices on Spotify. Hey, they just dropped a new track, So they're staying in my consciousness way more often than if they just disappeared for a year and then they gave me a record.
Yeah. And I just think about it a lot. And when I used to listen to records, just how immersive in 3D the experience was. I mean, OK Computer, I remember not even liking. The only songs I liked on that album were Let Down and Karma Police for the first couple months. And then I saw the Paranoid Android video come out maybe 3 or 4 months later. And that sort of got my brain to listen to that song in a new way. And then I went to Subterranean Homesick Alien. And then it was like this year-long immersive experience and same thing with like Sea Change and Wildflowers. Those were just a part of my life for a long period of time. And I'm not saying that was a better way of experiencing music than it is now, but I think that's why music, in particular artists and particular albums, still resonate in my body when I still hear them because they were such a big part of my life.
Yeah. Well, and I think I feel the same way, stuff when I was a teenager, and obviously there wasn't any streaming services back then. So, my friends and I, we've talked about this, back then there was only, all you had was the radio in the top 40. So it's no wonder that Prince was a megastar and Madonna was a megastar because there wasn't 1,000 other bands and artists that we were getting, like overloaded with that we are now. So of course, they were a much bigger part of our consciousness. So I resonate with that. And that's kind of the sad part of it. I think now is there's just too much music for that to happen, I think.
I said this, the people are going to hear these two podcasts back to back. I said this to my last guest because she was a singer-songwriter, but she started playing piano very young. So I want you to go into a time machine because I'm very curious about how music at a very young age, I know you started playing when you were six, but talk to me if you can remember what drew you to music and where did the curiosity come from? So it's just very basic at those early moments, if you remember.
Yeah. Well, we had a piano in the house. I think our neighbors had, loaned us their, it was like in a really old upright grand that I'm sure was in terrible shape. But my sister is 4 years older than me, and she actually started taking lessons. So she was probably 8, because my parents tell me that when I was 4, I was asking to take lessons. Like I was ready to go. Because I was already kind of like just tinkering around and playing by ear a little bit. And the piano teacher in town that my sister was taken from, that everybody took from her in town, said, "Well, I don't take anybody until they're 6." So I started with, her name was Mrs. Poole. I started lessons with Mrs. Poole when I was 6, and turns out she really wasn't that great of a teacher.
Yeah.
But I took lessons from her. all through grade school. So from basically first grade all through eighth, like through to eighth grade, I think.
Yeah. Well,
And
why wasn't she? Why are you saying this now, looking back, or why do you think she
yeah,
wasn't a good teacher?
well, because it's so. Let's see. When I was in sixth grade, so I grew up Catholic. So I went to a Catholic grade school. I went to a Catholic high school as well. But so every Friday, the school, my grade school, would go to church. There would be the Catholic mass, and the whole school, so kindergarten through eighth grade, would all, we'd go to mass together. And the music teacher guy, I can't remember. He had to have throat surgery, so
Okay.
he used to play the piano during the, there's music in the mass. Anyway, he was like, hey, and I played piano, and he's like, Kurt, I need you to play piano because I'm gonna have throat surgery, and so can you cover for me? And I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know, like so I could read music because I had, when I started taking piano lessons, it was all classical, so I could. Anyway, my point is, I remember there was like I had to play piano with like the nun who was playing acoustic guitar, and she gave me the music, but it wasn't all it was a lead sheet. So it was the chords with for anybody that's not a musician. It was like the chords were written out, and then the melody, which is what the people would sing. So I was kind of like, man, D7, like, I mean, I know I can read D on the page, but I don't know the D7 chord. Like, what are the notes in that chord? Because I didn't know. She'd never taught me any music theory.
Right.
So that was like my wake up call. Like, oh my gosh, like I've been reading notes my whole life, but I don't even. If you told me how to play a G13, I'd be like, I have no idea.
Right.
So I told my mom, like, hey, I want to, like, I need to learn theory. So my mom asked Mrs. Poole, can you start to teach Kurt music theory as well? And she was like, well, I don't like to teach music theory because a lot of, people teach it. There's a lot of different ways that people teach it. So, I was like, really? I just think, I'm not sure she actually knew music theory. So I feel like she gave me the brush off. So then what happened was, I actually quit taking from her like at some point in my eighth grade year. And then that's eventually like that summer or very shortly after, I went and studied music theory with this nun at this other Catholic college in my hometown. And that was like way over my head. I mean, she was like giving me stuff that was just, it was like second year college music theory. And I'm like 13 and she's like telling me about secondary dominance and all this stuff. And it was like, drinking from the fire hose. But, I know I'm getting off track a little bit.
No, but I was even thinking though, like during this time, were you even like, what was it doing for you? Like, why was there such an interest in it? Do you have any idea?
I just think I had this innate ability. I don't want to say like, because I feel confident about my skills, but I just, some people just pick up the football and they can throw it like 50 yards. And then I try to throw it. I'm like, I throw it as hard as I can. It only goes 20 yards. And some guys just have it, and like, for me, it just clicked and I loved it. And I was just enamored by the radio and the sounds that I was hearing on the radio, like, I mean, I know I'm dating myself, but just like the Phil Collins records and stuff, like In the Air Tonight, all that stuff, Power Station, the stuff, Tears for Fears, like, oh my gosh, I was just like, I want to do music and I want to be like, at the time, my dream was like, I thought, well, when I grow up, I'm going to be a touring guy, but I had this fascination with just sound. The classical thing was just like, if you took piano lessons, that's what you were going to do. I didn't even think to be like, well, why don't I study jazz piano? Or, why don't I, it's just what we did. So, but I loved the radio. I always loved pop radio, just top 40. I just couldn't get enough of it. So my dad bought me my first synthesizer when I was in 8th grade, and
But that's what's interesting to me, and I remember, and expand upon this. Like I remember having the piano at home, and I loved Head Over Heels from Tears for Fears, and I could hear it in my head, and I could play it on my piano, but it didn't sound like theirs because I think they were using a keyboard, or maybe it was another song. But I remember knowing that it was a piano of some sort, but it wasn't a piano, and so I get the sense you probably, you're playing the piano, but then what made you go, or your dad just got you the keyboard? Because that sort of made me curious about, wait, I'm playing this thing, but it's not sounding like that. How do they do that? So that's when I sort of started thinking about keyboards and other sounds.
yeah, I mean, I think, so I was able to kind of play by ear, even in grade school. I remember, my dad had a turntable, and so I would start to buy records, and so I got my synth, but then I also had like this PV keyboard amp that had it had a horn and a big 15-inch thing. I would drop a mic behind the piano, so I'd mic up my acoustic piano at home, and then I would put a record on our stereo, and we had pretty nice speakers, so I crank it up, and I was playing along, and I had learned the whole Survivor album. So I was just jamming along, and my dad would be sitting in the living room. He was super loud, but he loved it. And I mean, just like you though, I was like, the piano was like, okay, the piano's great, but it's like, it's one sound. Like, listen to what's on this record. Or like, the Asia record that was out, I don't remember the, Only Time Will Tell was the huge hit. Yeah. The opening, da 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 da. Oh, it's like that sound, And then just the use of synths, of keyboards in the pop setting, I was just like totally hooked. So then my dad bought me the synth, and that's when I answered an ad in my local paper for some, like a cover band was looking for a keyboard player, and I was like, Dad, I want to go audition. So I'm literally 13 years old. I might have just turned 14, but it was the summer after 8th grade. I show up, I have my Korg Poly 800, which was the first synth I had, and my little PV amp. And I show up to this lady's house, and everybody's in their 40s. And I'm this little kid. And I'm like, hey, I'm here for, I want to audition. So I got the job. Wow. I got the gig, and I started gigging that summer. And we gigged all summer. And there was like, these were just like local bars in my area near my hometown and like the adjacent towns. But I remember there was this one, it was a restaurant that had a bar. It was like a steakhouse, but then they had this bar that was connected. And they booked bands 6 nights a week. And to my parents' credit, I would play Monday night through Saturday night from like 9 until 1, something like that. I remember we had like 4 or 5 sets. I had to learn like 60 songs. This is part of the other thing, like playing by ear and then having the synth. I was even then starting to dial in as best I could. I was like programming patches for the Madonna song that we were playing and the REO Speedwagon and whatever, to try to match and play the parts just like the record. So that, I mean, I look back on it and those, that summer of gigging with that band, my mom would go Monday night, and she'd be out late, and then my dad would go Tuesday night, and they would just trade off because, hey, I had to go with me, obviously. But it's like, years later, I was, maybe 10 years ago or so, there was a stretch of maybe 4 or 5 years where I was part of basically like a corporate band that was hired to play for Microsoft's worldwide conference, where it was it was in the arena, and literally everyone from all over the world. So all the German Microsoft employees would be sitting in this section, and Japan was over there, and Australia and Canada, and they all had on warm-ups. It was like the Olympics, because they were waving their flags and stuff. So we were playing, whatever was the current top 40 at the time, and then but obviously, even then it was like I would be programming patches.
Wow.
Like everybody in the band were total pros, and they had toured with big artists, and like everyone was super dialed in, and all of our tones, we were trying to get our performances and the sounds so close to the record. But my point is just that had started for me when I was 13. That I was already like listening to, what that synth. What is it, and how can I? Then the Poly 800 was such a limited,
Yeah.
synth. Looking back on it, I remember thinking, man, it kind of felt like whatever I did, it always sounded the same or had this sameness to it. And now looking back on it, I was like, oh, I understand why, because the architecture is pretty simple. But
Yeah.
but that passion had started then. So
Well, that's
it's just
it's really cool that your parents were really like all in. They didn't hold you back in any way.
no, they didn't. I mean, I was
That's cool.
looking back on it, I was in some environments I probably shouldn't have been in, at that young of an age. But they did. They were completely supportive. And I basically played keys from the time I was, 13 or 14, all through college, for money and for fun. Performing was a big part of my teenage years and my early 20s. And I really did think that I was going to be a touring guy. And I did get to go out on the road with actually a country artist in 2008. And it was just really interesting. I got to finally do like sort of what I wanted to do. And we were on a really nice bus. And I mean, she was a new artist. So, at these festivals where whoever the big artist was headlining, we would play on the stage at like 6 p.m., for 30 minutes.
Right.
And then the headliner plays at 10 or 11. But I realized, like, okay, I'm almost on this bus for 3 days, to bus out, so say the gig's Friday night. Well, we leave Thursday night at midnight because they don't want to pay the bus driver. If you leave on Thursday, they have to pay him for that day. So that's how it works. You
Okay.
get on the bus at midnight. So at the time, my son was 2 years old, and I'm just like sleep deprived and trying to stay up until midnight to drive down to the bus, and everybody's like, hey, let's watch a movie, let's hang out. And I'm like, I got to go to bed,
Yeah.
I'm so tired. And then they're all, I think I was the only one that had a child at that time. So, I'm waking up early and they're all sleeping until 10 or whatever. But my point is, while I loved playing even just that half hour, and it was a great band and I had such a blast with everybody, there were times where I couldn't wait to get off the bus because they'd get a hotel room for us sometimes, like during the day. If we got into town in the afternoon, you could go up to the hotel room for a few hours. Well, I would take my laptop and my keyboard, my hard drives, and I'd be working on my headphones and working on production. And my wife and I were releasing electronic music at the time, and I couldn't that was so much more edifying than I'm gone for 3 days supporting this artist, and I loved her. She was great, but at the end of the day, I was like, wow, okay. Plus, just monetarily, there's a ceiling to being a sideman musician, side guy.
Yeah.
And you're versus like creating something that you can potentially own. It's like building assets versus just work for hire.
Was there a moment, because it feels like you sort of naturally were making money just going on the road and got gigs. I guess a lot of people are thinking to themselves, I want to do this for a living. But it feels like in your teens, you were just kind of doing it. It sort of was this natural progression. But I'm starting to think, feels like, was the intention in college to be that touring musician, and then you kind of realized in your 20s, I don't know if it's because of your family or your son, but then you were thinking, I need to do something else to make a living, but I still wanted to be in music. I mean, how did that conversation go in your head, or were you thinking, let's get out, I can't do touring, this is insane. What was going on?
A couple things. I mean, so I studied classical piano as an undergraduate. So around the time I was a junior, like nearing the mid to end of my junior year, I remember thinking, all right, I'm going to graduate with a piano degree. And I didn't I didn't really, my intention wasn't to be a piano teacher,
Right.
which it would have allowed me to do. And I was studying classical piano in college still, but like playing in the cover band on the weekends. So that's when I started to look for grad school and to see what was out there, because I felt like I'm going to need some real world, like, education other than like teaching and playing classical piano.
Right.
So that's when I found Miami, and the program was, I mean, I couldn't even believe that something like this existed. At the time, Berkeley didn't have any grad programs. They were only only undergraduate. Now, Berkeley would have been great. And I remember looking at Berkeley, when I was in high school, but it seemed too far away. So where I went to college in Illinois was like a couple hours from my hometown. So that worked out. But anyway, I found the program in Miami, which was a mix of sort of, it was called media writing and production, but we studied orchestration, we studied music production in the studio, which meant microphones and console, signal flow and just that side of it. We studied film scoring, we studied jazz arranging. Like I had to write an original piece and orchestrate it for full orchestra. I had a couple like big band arranging classes, which were really, for me, really hard because I didn't come from a big jazzer background. So, the guys that had grown up playing jazz and they already knew the voicings. And there's like all these rules that when you have 5 saxophones and it's a C minor 7, there's rules for which guy gets which notes, and then if the line goes ba-da-da-da-da and they all go da-da-da-da-da together, there's like, it's really, pretty intricate. So anyway, the program exposed me to a lot of different, things in music. And it really kind of prepared me to, I don't want this to sound cocky, but the program prepares you to almost do anything.
Yeah.
If you got hired to do an arrangement for an orchestra or a small combo, like I could do it. If I had to score something to picture, I could do it. So that, I think that sort of, it was, there was a lot of composition, involved. So I think that kind of whet my appetite for that part of my creative brain. I moved back to Chicago after grad school, and I actually got hired as a composer at a game company. So I was making like music for at the time, like pinball and slot machines and like arcade games. It was 3 companies in one. It was called Williams Bally Midway in Chicago, but I still had the dream of touring, even though I was like doing the composition thing. And then I moved to Nashville and started like producing song demos, and I did some writing, like really cheap. There was a client here in town that produced jingles for like local businesses all over the country. They would go out and get the work, and then I'd do the jingles. My wife would write them mostly, and then I would produce them and record, whatever. But I was like in my mid 30s, I think, when I got to do the touring thing, and by then I was already hooked on the writing and the production.
Yeah.
And the touring thing felt like, well, unless I'm, it wasn't just a money thing, but there was a realization that unless you're playing with the top artists and they put you on salary, that you're just a side guy, and there's a ceiling. Like, in Nashville, playing with a new artist, back then the pay was like maybe $250 a show per guy, which,
Right.
That's not a lot of money to be gone for almost 3 days or 2.5 days. You got to play a boatload of shows a year to make that into a decent living.
Do you think it's harder now more than ever? Like, I think about, because you're talking about money, and I think, I think society has a hard time placing a monetary value on art. And a lot of people out there might have, think $250 to play the guitar or the bass or the keyboard for half an hour. What, that, but then you think about like, bills and responsibilities and it's so complicated because everybody has their own story with money and success. But I don't know. I wonder if it's harder now for artists to make a living. And then I also think about, I think it's important to live in a society where artists can make a living through their art. And it feels like the culture is stripping that possibility away. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like yes and no, not to
Yeah.
play both sides, but I think because I've seen it, I mean, is it harder? Yeah, most likely. I think it is. Especially with the collapse of, the record business essentially starting in, the year 2000 or whenever Napster came on, that was the beginning of the end in terms of being able to sell and monetize music, so but I mean, things are, kind of coming back up with the streaming side of things, but that's another issue. But I think, the money's moved. There's independent people here in town that make an incredible living and don't ever have to leave their house. Because it's the buffet of income, like I'm saying, and these are people that have really poured into their YouTube channels and their streaming numbers, and they're building their fan base, and through the vehicle of film and TV sync, getting a good sync can absolutely change the landscape of your numbers, which will then that's money in your pocket, now. And if you keep releasing things, then put out your audio only on YouTube with just a graphic, and now you've got X amount of followers, and this song now has 5 million plays on YouTube, and it's got 10 million or 50 million plays on Spotify, and it's like that's money. Like, I mean, we can all cry how poorly streaming pays, and it's not great, and it's very lopsided. Not to get too like music businessy, but I mean, the difference between what you would make on the master side of things versus the publishing, is not even remotely the same. So do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But as an independent, these people own their masters, and so they're killing it. I mean, that's like the plus side of where things are right now. If you want to, do that and take the time to build your subscribers, the amount of, Shazamming that happens is crazy. I mean, I had a meeting the other day, and I have a song that I co-wrote and co-produced produced that was in some reality show, and he was telling me, because he manages the girl that I co-wrote it with, he's like, man, dude. He's like, the Shazams off that song from that episode are like, I mean, it's not like insane, but he's like, it really spiked. And he's like, the little, it's not always about the money. It's like, okay, so the placement didn't pay much, but look at all the new eyeballs and new fans that you're making. So, as you have more success in this film and TV, it just helps build your fan base, and then it just snowballs, and then anything you release, you're guaranteed to have millions of streams because you've got this momentum behind you if you have enough eyeballs on it.
Last question. Now, I'm thinking two things, but we'll see. But like, what are your favorite keyboards that you are using right now, or what's?
Favorite keyboards?
Yeah.
Now you're talking my language. Well, I know you can't see it, but I bought a Korg monopoly.
Okay.
Maybe 2 years ago. So for anybody that doesn't know, it was out in 1982. It's fully analog. It, no presets. It's just the sound you have is where the knobs are. And anyway, without totally nerding out, it's I love it. I cannot believe the amount of creativity that it inspired in me initially. I mean, it still does, but like when I got it, I didn't have anything else that did what that did. And I mean, I those are the kinds of things I can count on one hand how many things I've bought that have over the years that have done that.
Wow.
And so that was one. Um, and probably I don't use it as much, but I have the Moog, the sub fatty or the subsequent 37. I'm looking at it. It's over here. That thing is really versatile, and I actually use it a lot for kind of like sound designy kind of things where even in like really aggressive tracks, I'll just drown it in reverb and be, messing with the filters and morphing sounds, and it becomes this wash of like this really ominous thing. And it's, most people think, oh, I'm going to use the Moog for the bass sound, and I mean it does that great too, but I find it such an inspiring instrument when you're kind of like in real time just living and breathing with it. That's the thing about real keyboards or real hardware that just plugins don't it's not the same experience.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great sounding plugins, but
Yeah, I think about that too. Like I have some Arteria has a
yeah.
couple great soft synths that I love. I think Pigment is one of them. But it is a different experience when you're actually holding on to the hardware. But again, it goes back to that point that we've talked about. Like, does anybody even notice or care? And probably not. But I think as an artist, the experience with the actual keyboard does feel a little bit more full-bodied and three-dimensional.
100% agree. Yeah. It's more organic. It's more fun. And
Yeah.
the more fun that we can inject into the creative process, the better, the better the end product will be.
Yeah.
I mean, could I accomplish the same thing using Serum? Probably, but I'd be mouse clicking myself to death. It's like, it's just so rewarding, just like picking up an acoustic guitar and, playing that and just, it's resonating in your hands. There's nothing else like it. So,
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to have, if my 13-year-old self, if you told me, hey, you'll have the Juno 60 and the Korg and the Moog and, the JX8P and some other things. And I've been like, no way. So
Yeah.
I'm blessed that, I'm really happy with, I mean, there's always more, I love the Prophet, that'd be something else wouldn't mind having, the Prophet 10.
Yeah, that's great. It's very expensive, but I keep eyeballing it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a good one.
How old's you? Do you have two kids or one?
Just one.
And how old is I think boy, right?
Yeah. His name's Lennox.
How old is Lennox?
He just turned 16.
Is he like really into the music? You could tell he's going to be doing that for a long time, or
No, actually, well, he's incredibly intelligent, and he's not going to do music.
Oh, okay.
He'll end up being an engineer, like probably a mechanical engineer. The music's just for fun, but his brain, I mean, there's a lot of like pretty intricate routing that can be done on the Moog, the subsequent 37, and on the Korg, on the monopoly, and he 100% understands how to use these synthesizers, and he gets these crazy routings going and modulation. I'm using the LFO to modulate the envelope, and then that's doing whatever. Like, we'll just come over here at night sometimes, and he'll just experiment with the sound, with the synths, and it's cool to see because he's not. I came up studying music, playing piano, and that's not been his background. So it's almost like he approaches it. It's a completely different approach because he's not thinking about it musically. He's almost thinking about it from an engineer's point of standpoint, just in the routings and all that. But
yeah.
But it is fun
Yeah,
to see.
bet.
I mean, he's got the music thing. It's just different. Like he doesn't play an instrument, but he makes crazy music on his iPad. I've shown him some stuff about mixing, but
Yeah.
like he's brilliant. So
That's cool.
It's really neat to see. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Kurt, man, this was wonderful, and I had a sense that it would be cool to talk about music. I think it's just for me right now. I think I'm sort of on hiatus creatively. Just some of my projects are done, and I'm sort of like curious on what I'm going to do next. So it's just nice to have these discussions and talk art and music and the crazy world of tech and how that influences everything. So yeah, it was great to see you and talk.
Yeah, this is fun. Should do
Yeah.
more often.
Yeah, I know. That's what my last guest said too. It's weird. She said she's like I don't talk about this kind of stuff very often ever. So it's nice to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man.
Well,
Well,
thanks for having.
of course. Yeah, it was great to see you. Are you gonna go to any of the Durango stuff or that's just done or you're
I mean, maybe at some point.
yeah
The traveling thing has been so
right
off the table.
yeah
I mean, you know, eventually I'd love to get back out and meet some people. I mean,
sure
it's funny. I mean, I met a lot of people. I think the year I met you there was my first year.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, I still know a lot of those folks that are
yeah
here in town that were there that year,
cool
that I would have never met if I hadn't gone. But
yeah
you stay in touch with any of them, or
yeah a few of them
usually,
yeah.
have you gone to any more?
I feel like I've been to three, but I don't remember if the one that I definitely went to three, but I don't remember if the one that I saw you at was the last one I went to. I'm not sure.
I mean, that was like 2014,
I
maybe. That was a
know
long time
it
ago.
was yeah, but I've started to feel like maybe I should go back again because they just had one out here like a couple weeks ago, and I was but yeah, so I feel like maybe next year I'll return
Yeah.
and see. Well, cool, man. Well, have a great rest of your day. This will probably post in like a week or two, but I'll certainly let you know. And it was great to see you and great to talk.
Yeah, for sure. I enjoyed it.
Cool, man. I'll see you
All
soon.
right.
Yeah. Have a
See ya.
good day. Bye.
Thank you.